that'll be Peter, which, as Henry Kissinger says in another context, has the additional advantage of being true. Decades and still counting into the drug war. I think Mexico is now approaching 200,000 dead and scores of thousands missing. Colombia, we have people here from Colombia who I hope will fill us in. But it goes on, and despite the best efforts of President Santos in the peace process, Colombia is now exporting more cocaine than ever. And the levels of transit through Mexico as they are. We'll start with Pete Mcguire, who is historian, legal historian. His latest book is Tie Stick, which has the additional advantage of being terribly funny. I think journalism is full of very funny people, very little of which we see on the page. His book is marvellous. He's also an ultimate fighting wrestler and a surfer, so keep your disputes polite. Pete, over to you.
Okay.
Let's start with you.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Austin. Thank you, Vaughn, for inviting me. I've always wanted to come here and see my old friend Ed. than a year ago when a man driving a pickup truck overdosed on heroin, rear-ended a car, killing a 2-year-old. When the paramedics came to him, he was unconscious. They brought him back from the dead with Narcan. It was the 4th time this man had been Narcan back to life. So we're seeing a cost now of opiates of something like $78 billion a year. My Just War on Drugs would legalize marijuana in all forms for adult usage. And this would be a decision made out of military necessity, out of sheer prescribe OxyContin for long periods of time, and how Purdue Pharmaceutical, a private company worth $34 billion, circumvented safeguards. Although St. Augustine described punishment as justice for the unjust, the Sacklers will not go to the gallows under My Just War on Drugs. That would not be keeping in St. Augustine's spirit. They might even be allowed to keep a Gulfstream or a house in the Hamptons. However, instead of plastering their family name as they have over New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art and London's Royal Academy, the fortunes of the 16th richest family in America will be used to build rehab facilities.
count themselves as thinking, intelligent and responsible, to accept as normal the idea that people should be stupefied for a large amount of the time, either themselves or others. And we have become astonishingly used to this and astonishingly used to making apologies for it. It's even seriously put forward as one of the freedoms that we should defend, along with the freedoms of thought, speech and assembly. And if you attack this freedom, people come at you as if you've made an assault on the Bill of Rights or Magna Carta. I promise you, this has happened to me many, many times. It's not a freedom at all. To me, it's the reverse of a freedom. It's a surrender of freedom. It's a surrender of moral choice. And it is, in general, a surrender of gifts which have been given to you, which you should use if you don't like the world as it is. Whose users risk permanent, irreversible mental illness seems to me to be among the hardest drugs you could conceivably take. And the damage which I have seen it do to the families of friends, and which I know it to have done because people write to me all the time about it, to the families of thousands of people in this country, is colossal. And as I say, irreversible. Once these people's lives are destroyed, and the lives of their families are then destroyed along with them, it is over. There is no coming back from it. There is no treatment that stops it. It's not as if you can stop it and say, right, that's all over, I won't be smoking marijuana anymore and I will recover. It's not true. And it is an enormously dangerous drug which has been portrayed by wicked, selfish, and in my view stupid people as being harmful. before yesterday, you find it on the clothes of people who've just mown down other people in the street in fast cars. In the case I'm referring to, the person involved was the child of 2 police officers who somehow hadn't noticed that he stank of marijuana and let him drive their car, so he went out and killed 2 people in the street. That's just a part of it. There's an enormous amount more. Isn't it odd that in the period when marijuana use has exploded in our society, the amount of knife crime has exploded and the amount of violent crime has exploded? Isn't it odd that you can find almost on every occasion where it is thoroughly reported that where there has been violent crime, there has been marijuana use? Isn't it extraordinary that nobody does anything about it, that the government has no interest whatsoever in it, that the police have no interest in discovering whether criminals... cannabis, an immensely long list of these cases. But there is no question whatsoever that there is a correlation. The only question remains, is it a meaningful correlation and can the link be proven? It's certainly an alarming enough correlation for any intelligent and society interested in self-defense to look at it. Anyway, is it actually fantastically surprising? I mean, it wasn't terribly surprising to discover that inhaling clouds of burning vegetable matter gave you lung cancer. It isn't terribly surprising if people who take an awful lot of a powerful mind-altering drug go off the rails. And it's not particularly surprising if, having gone off the rails, they become violent. And here is the problem. Again, you look at Alex Berenson's book, recently published, Tell Your Children.
I've just got a question. And I want to get to you on banks and kingpins on a moment and opiates. But Peter, I mean, you know, your work on marijuana, I've read it. It's very persuasive.
I don't find it persuasive at all, frankly.
Okay.
I grew up in this marijuana culture, right?
Well, that's why you don't find it persuasive.
No, I left it behind. I managed to get a PhD. I managed to write 4 books. I'm not permanently and mentally brain damaged. Perhaps you might.
We don't know
think
what you
so.
were like before.
Peter,
Now,
everything you say about marijuana, where does alcohol fit into this?
Where does alcohol fit
into this? If you go around, you know, the centre of Newcastle, Liverpool, Saturday night, and
Stop drinking it if I thought by doing so I would save people from the things I have personally seen. So no, it's not, there's no inconsistency there. The fact is it has been legalized as you want to legalize marijuana, as you just said.
Well, it is
once
legal
that's done,
where I'm from.
Well, it's not.
It is legal
not
where I'm
here.
from. There's no putting the genie back
there's
in the
federal.
bottle.
There's still a federal law against it.
And
But Pete,
in
can
the
I-
United States,
I want to pick you
let
up on
me
that.
just finish. In the United States, we aggressively pursued marijuana. We used our military with Operation Green Harvest in Hawaii, with our camp operation in California, and were completely unsuccessful. The only thing it did was drive the price through the roof. The idea that I find it very hard to believe. And again, this Berenson book, yes, it's gotten a great deal of press, but I'm totally unconvinced.
Have you read
As
it?
I'm unconvinced, yes, I did read it actually.
So which are the bits which you challenge?
I would challenge the fact that his wife is a psychiatrist, and he's basically, using her as an intellectual backstop for the idea. I think, yes, mental illness, people with pre-existing conditions of mental illness who smoke high-test marijuana, it will exacerbate that condition. But your claim that if you smoke marijuana, you're permanently
I want to get back to Aldous Huxley. There's a kind of, I think there's a discourse on drugs whereby a lot of people in Europe, United States, talk about drugs as as a recreational thing. What you would call social control. I mean, drugs makes the party go with a bang. Drugs makes me feel better than I do when I'm not taking them, etc., etc. In parts of the world where, for what it's worth, I work more, people take hard drugs, not marijuana, to self-obliterate because life is so, pardon me, fucking awful. They'd rather not be there than be there.
where you have, you get caught with a handful of crack rocks, you get a minimum mandatory, you're caught with the same amount of powder. You don't. Blacks do crack, whites do powder, and we really got a racist two-tiered judicial system. But now we have something much worse. In the last 2 years, I know at least 6 people who have died of synthetic opiates. Drug users don't want street drugs. They want synthetic opiates. That's the gold standard. And it's now becoming a life and death issue.
False. I spend an awful lot of time criticizing, for instance, the prescription of amphetamines to children on the basis of supposed ADHD.
I completely agree.
And indeed, I very much sympathize with the immensely powerful critique of the prescription of SSRI antidepressants made by Marcia Angel in the New York Review of Books, itself based on several very powerful books which seem to me not to have been answered at all by the defenders of this. I think the whole area of prescription, both for pain and for psychiatric illness under the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, is extremely questionable, and I think that everybody should be questioning it. And I think that the
of their claims. That's one of the things the Sacklers are facing in court now. And so there was this incredible normalization of the use of incredibly strong, opiates. And I've been to too many funerals as of late as a result of, people chopping up OxyContin, mixing it with cocaine, and figuring out ways to get around the various safeguards of the pharmaceutical companies.
Let's talk about money. I must ask you both about money before we throw this open. An excellent report by two economists at the Universidad de los Andes in Bogota came up with a marvelous report.
Is selfish, rich, Western kids buying drugs against the law. That is the source of it all. That's where it all comes from, 100%, every penny of it. And they are the people who can be stopped from doing it.
Not in Glasgow and Dublin.
Oh, that way. Oh, okay.
By comparison with the people in Mexico and Afghanistan and Colombia whose lives they ruin, people in Glasgow are rich. Yes, they are.
Pete, the bank, the money.
Well, I learned that from you, Ed. So the bank, the money. I think, of course, I completely agree with Peter. I have no soft spot for bankers laundering dirty money. But I think they're sort of above the law, and they have become above the law for a long time. But Peter
Emory wheel. And for a while he used to deny it until I went to the Emory University Library and got a copy of it. So he doesn't deny it anymore, but he did say it. And it's been the most successful red herring, I think, in history. People genuinely believe that marijuana is a medicine, and you get these tragic cases of these mothers with their terribly ill children. And people believe that what is going on here is some kind of proof that marijuana actually has some kind of medicinal properties. And this has been immensely successful in creating the medical marijuana scam in huge numbers of American states, where, you know as well as I do, it is prescribed to people who haven't got anything wrong with them by people who are not particularly interested in curing them of it anyway. It is a way of getting around the possession
Sure,
laws.
but
It has been for ages.
You would deny that it doesn't provide. It was a synthetic THC derivative that didn't work. And again, the same way that you saw your friend's son suffer, I saw AIDS patients get great relief from marijuana, from their nausea. This is well documented. Sativex works quite well for epileptic cases, and that's well documented. I've seen chemotherapy patients that can't sleep get relief from it. My own father takes, UCLA made THC CBD pills every night, and it
honestly,
allows him to
most of the
sleep.
same claims could be made for Scotch whiskey with the same authority.
No, there's
It's
no
not,
side
it is
effect.
not the effect. No, it doesn't. It's,
Yes,
it's
it
different, It's
does.
a different ingredient.
No, that's not
Marijuana
true.
has CBD and THC.
Yes,
in it.
in order for the CBD pills to be truly effective, they have THC in them.
How much THC?
It depends on the pill. It depends on the concoction. Dr. Raymer in Pasadena, California, is at the forefront of this. And again, I've seen those pills that he makes. He's an actual chemist. Provide great relief and get people off of opiates.
So, what proportion of CBD and what proportion of THC do they have in them?
So, I don't know the exact proportions. I'm not
No,
going to
at all.
lie to you.
The Kingpin Strategy. It's been the sort of centerpiece of this, and I think the way the prosecution were talking yesterday, they really think that if Chapo goes down, this is going to make a difference. It isn't. So it's sort of two questions in one to you both, really. One, this clearly doesn't work, and it's been the cornerstone of the war on drugs ever since it began, in the Nixon sort of phase of it anyway. And secondly, I think, this is what people in Colombia and people in Mexico have a right to ask, which is sort of, what is it about your society?
some of these kids, their asses are bigger than their shoulders at 7 years old, and this is a sign of the times. I think this is a huge problem. And again, the answer is not in a pill. And again, the ADHD sort of medicating, and it's mainly little boys. Why can't the little boys sit still? And as the father of 2 sons, I wound up taking them out of school and teaching them at home because I was so disgusted by both American public school and both American private school. They're so precious with all its little rules.
Up having a spliff. But I mean, but what is there a deeper problem? Pete's talked about it, and Colombia, Mexico, Bolivia, Peru, they could buy at discount warehouse rates and be the number one consumers of cocaine per capita in the world. They aren't. We are. Why?
Well, I think that's why I started what I said this evening with Aldous Huxley. This is a prophecy which is coming true. One of the many problems with it, even if you liked, and there is something superficially attractive about the world portrayed in Brave New World in the first couple of chapters before you realize what's going on. think that passive self-stupefaction is the answer to any of them. But I'm a Puritan. I like to think that my forebears rode with Cromwell's Ironsides. I'm genuinely puritanical about these things, and I'm horrified at the almost complete death of that rather noble view of life which they held, that you are responsible for what you do, and that if you see injustice and wrong, you fight it. You don't adapt to it and give into it. But I think that's where we are. We are a passive society. We let things happen to us.
I'd just like to add one quick thing.
Please do, and then we're going to open it because
I respectfully disagree with Peter in that I think marijuana breeds passivity, if anything, and that's why it's kind of.
To join the panel to provide some scientific contexts, and I hope
scientific.
I'm not a scientist.
If there is anyone here, please do make yourselves known. And use the microphone because we're live streaming.
Please do. And also the issue. I think we've sort of agreed that society's fucked. We haven't talked enough about the countries where the hundreds of thousands of people are dying from this or disappearing. Please do that. And also the issue is not that society's fucked, but should people be locked up for messages.
Well, I am that Colombian. I mean, you have probably been thinking about
Why did no one listen?
I'm not my subject matter expertise, Ed. I'll defer to Peter.
Well, I wouldn't want to talk about the United States because increasingly I don't understand it, but
Nor do I.
I understand it less every day. But in terms of Britain, what the political class have decided to do is to let something happen while taking no responsibility for it and pretending to be against it. If you ask any government spokesman in this country, they say, well, there's no possibility of us legalizing illegal drugs. We continue to maintain the law, and they come up with bogus.
One of your flies were open. Just you might want to check that. But the
Kind of
second
you,
and
so
more
I mean,
important one
glad
is.
you care.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I apologise I was late, but I did hear you talking about the correlation between terrorist people who had committed acts of terrorism and consumption of marijuana, and that you had followed this in detail. But did you follow their consumption of tea as well? Because otherwise it's meaningless. You can find a correlation between terrorists and consumption of marijuana. You can find that I suspect that 95% of terrorists have consumed tea at some stage in their life.
of this irresponsible horse excrement, which they put out and which you're putting out, people died in huge numbers who could have been saved if nobody had listened to it. If you want to put forward this kind of shameful stuff, that's your affair. It's, as far as I'm concerned, it's between you and your conscience. I think it's absolutely shameful that any serious person with anything remotely resembling an intelligence would come up with such a feeble argument. I don't propose to say anything else about it.
Right.
Okay, I think you've lost the argument there because...
Well, you do, but that I'm afraid there's an explanation for that which I'm not going to go into tonight.
Go to the next question,
Thank you
please.
so much.
legalization is absolutely fundamental.
So my name is Jen. Pleasure to be here. I'm actually from Canada. What brought me here was to speak at future of Medicaid because they think a gummy is the way to do it. And I absolutely applaud you for what you're saying because I do not think we should have gummies or candies. I think we need dose control. We need doctors to understand that there is titration. And we absolutely need to make sure that as cannabis becomes an active ingredient, it is done responsibly with social consideration for the safety of our future. And I'm just wondering what both of you think of Canada and the way we're going about things and, you know, where you are getting your knowledge so that we can do better as we're coming across the pond to collaborate with you, not just for taxes, but for the betterment of the planet.
Well, I would...
Do you want to address that?
Yeah, I just would say that the United States federal government basically made it
marijuana has been legalized, you'll never hear another word about medical marijuana again. It's purely propaganda to try and create a Trojan horse good image for a very dangerous, unpleasant drug. And that's its purpose, and once that purpose has been fulfilled, it will cast aside all this pretense of being anything to do with helping children with epilepsy or anybody else. It's nothing to do with it. Its purpose is to gain legalization, advertising, and billions and billions and billions of dollars in revenue at the expense of human misery, for which all those involved should be bitterly ashamed, and one day will be.
So.
I think I don't think it's that simple, really. I think the United States. I mean, I could go on and on, but it's in quite a bad way at the moment, to say the least. We're very divided, the most divided I've ever seen it in my life, and it's not getting any better.
Can I just use my bully pulpit somewhat? I think there's something that Ed's tried to bring us back to, and it kind of perhaps revealingly we've stopped talking about, which is, what.
to that. I think the only way through for Colombia and so forth, and you could look at Bolivia in this, and what it's managed to do in some aspects, is development. Sorry, and that is part of the question.
Can I take that? Because I came recently back from Tumaco, which is the world's most intensive and thereby violently contested coca growing region. Mexicans control the waterfront, and 12 militias fight for access to it. And this is why, if I may, peace is so much tougher than war, and getting rid of coca is so much harder than persuading people to.
Until they're deterred, then they will carry on doing
But
it.
Peter, I mean, narco cartels are always seen as sort of the antithesis of our healthy society. They're actually ahead of the game. I mean, they're brilliant. They're much better businessmen than most so-called legal corporate CEOs. God, I wish
that's because they don't pay any tax.
I wish El Mayo was running the transport for London. It would run a lot better than it does. When the Berlin Wall went down, the first Western products into Eastern Europe were not Microsoft or Apple. It was the Camorra from Naples with Kalashnikovs buying up everything under license that then went to Central Africa, and lo and behold, 2 years later, Rwanda. These guys are good. Demand is created. It's Facebook.
drink driving, generally, if it's serious, relatively obvious. You can see a vehicle is swerving in the road, and seatbelts are the same. You can see if somebody's not wearing a seatbelt. Drugs can be purchased and used in a very private way. You would probably call it clandestine. I would just call it in the privacy of your own home. Can you think of an example of something which we can stop just through the sort of throwing money at the police and the law enforcement, which is more equivalent to drug taking in that sense, and not quite so obvious and not quite so public, that wouldn't cause huge deprivations of or
effective, because that was pure THC without the other cannabinoids and CBD. They've since made it much more effective. And as I said, I've seen with my own eyes great results with cancer patients. My own father, who broke his hip and was on opiates and unable to sleep as a result, has had great effect. But more than any single other thing was during the 1980s when I lived in New York City, and there was the real beginning of the AIDS crisis before there were AIDS drugs, and it really was an epidemic. I was engaged to a ballerina in the Joffrey it's incredibly high test, like 180 proof liquor. So you build up a resistance to it, and you become, you smoke more and more of it, and it does less and less. Again, I think within the range of the marijuana family, you have everything from Coors Light to Everclear 180% pure grain alcohol, or 180 proof pure grain alcohol. So to talk about marijuana as if it's this one thing, someone who spent most of my life around marijuana and different types of marijuana, being utilized as medicine, in my view.
Well, we're going to have to go
Yes.
and go and get these two gentlemen some legal grape juice shortly. But you do bring to it where I just would like to end this case with the Sacklers tomorrow. Let's end at the beginning. I think we're all interested in this from all directions. Where's it going to go?
Well, the
Where do you think
judge
it'll
has
go?
ordered
Is
that
this going
all
to
the
be HSBC
redacted
take two, or
the judge has ordered that all the redacted documents about how they influence doctors to prescribe more opiates, how they sort of got around the safeguards of the